All right, well, I want to see if I can do an upbeat video because there's so many so many videos, not just of mine, I think, but that you can find anywhere that are trying to explain true things to us, but things that have a tendency to make us so I was going to say despondent, but make us perhaps feel despair. And I do it to myself a lot. I discover true things about the nature of our reality. Um, stuff that are shocking and tend to feel like that the ground beneath you is shaking or the rug is being pulled out from underneath you, and it's an unsettling experience. And I suspect that the psychology involved then when I want to tell other people about this shocking discovery that I've made, and that other people want to tell me about it, and I am then on tenterhooks to find out what is this terrible, shocking thing, that it's sort of like that we need others to be there with us. Just like it's not that misery loves company, but supposing if you're like a group of friends and you're too scared to go exploring a haunted house on your own, but you need the Dutch courage of 3 or 4 of your friends with you, so that you can all be scared together, and somehow that's going to make the experience a little easier because at least you have some camaraderie. So I think that's the thing. And so maybe it's not such a bad thing, but it does mean that you may think at least that you're only trying to educate or inform or help people to understand what is, but there must probably be an element of, I hope that if I can involve other people and let other people know that I share the burden a little bit. So maybe there's a selfish attitude to it, as well as a selfless attitude where you just want to freely share information. So I do believe that I have got a lot of information on the subject of both Antarctica and on the subject of, I'll say, mind control of the media that I don't think anybody else might know, or that is not widely known, or I certainly haven't encountered by chance anyway, and I've gone looking for it too. But I'm going to leave those things till later, but I will mention them, and I'm not trying to tease these things. I'm just saying that perhaps I shouldn't go too far with this stuff, because I thought I had laid a good foundation where I could say, look, don't despair because here are the foundational principles. But I've since realized that no, you can't skip ahead too far without making sure that you have several layers of foundation. Otherwise people might still say, oh no, it's not just the sky's going to fall through, but the floor is going to cave in and we're all going to collapse and die. And I don't want to be somebody who is always just trying to bring doom and gloom, shock and despair, and that sort of thing. So I want this to be a positive message about life. Okay, so that's my preamble. And now here's the subject matter. And so the subject matter is, I'm going to say it's about Bill Murray. And a lot of people might say, well, he's just a comedian or he's just an actor, just like so many other people in Hollywood or of Hollywood. But I'd like to think that there are some exceptions, and I think there's some exceptions of any environment, or some exceptions who aren't the standard product of an environment, or who they associate with or have associated with. Bill Murray has been in some surprisingly interesting and thought-provoking and philosophical films, despite the fact that he's a comedian. Just like Jim Carrey, although lately, it's not that I concern myself too much with stuff, but I wouldn't say that I'm somebody who would advocate looking at Jim Carrey now and saying that's how you need to either live your life or philosophize. But certainly Jim Carrey is a very interesting character. I can't say that I don't even want to say too much about him, because I think that he's going to be a divisive character in a moment, but I don't think Bill Murray would be. I think that he is still pretty much universally loved. I don't think you're going to find too many people who don't care for him. And equally, I don't think you're going to find too many people who intensely dislike him. I think that's got to be rare. Anyway, what I want to say about him is that a few years ago, I always loved his movies, but especially, I think what became my favorite film once I saw it, my favorite film was at one point Back to the Future. And again, there's a lot of philosophy in that. It's not just a tale about, teenager who time travels and has a pretty adventurous time. I think there's layers of meaning to it, and there's a philosophy, if only about on the surface level, of what would it be like if we could time travel and meet our parents, and what would we do different, and what would we change about our life, and would it be ultimately pointless to try and change your life, and so on. And then in a similar way, but not exactly the same, but there's another element to that. It's about, what if you could, not exactly time travel, we don't know whether it's time travel, but you wake up every morning and it's Groundhog Day and you're reliving the same day again and again. And this is what I want to get to about Bill Murray. Not the idea that it's not, I don't care whether he's time traveling or whether he's stuck in a time loop or whether there's a God that's not present that's sending him back until he learns a lesson. I kind of do care about that bit because, whether you believe in reincarnation or not, or whether the idea of reincarnation upsets you for one reason or another, or excites you for one reason or another, it's important to do thought experiments in your head and wonder about how you might behave or how it might affect you, or just what you might think it would change about your outlook on life if there was such a thing as either a reincarnation after a whole life, or you were sent back as a different life or as the same life until you learned something, or what if it was the same week or what if it was the same day. And so that's something that's being examined there. And many people, as it starts out in the film, would say, oh, that would be hell to live a normal day. As Bill Murray says in the beginning, what if I would, or why didn't I have that wonderful day over and over again when I was in Hawaii or Tahiti and I met those, or either was that one lovely day or two lovely days, but he realized at some point, I guess, or it's implied that he realized that, no, that wouldn't have been the best day ever, that would have turned out to be hell. And he was given a rare gift to be able to do the same day over and over again. And the more he tried to perfect his chat-up lines with Andy McDowell, it kind of worked, but there was an emptiness to it. There was always a superficiality. And at some point he learned that it wasn't about that he had to just learn skills to impress her, that the achievements that he was making by learning the piano, by figuring out how to help people in the community, by making ice sculptures, in a way he was faking it till he made it. And lucky for him, one way or another, something clicked and connected with him. So maybe there's a slight lesson there that if you don't know how to be happy, just keep smiling until maybe one day you'll wake up and you realize you are. But what I wanted to lead from that is that, okay, he was playing a character there, but Bill Murray always seems to be playing some kind of version of himself. And I saw a film a few years ago called Zombieland, and of course we're used to the idea of actors playing cameos, but he was playing a character of himself, Bill Murray. Again, that mightn't be unique. Sometimes actors do cameos in roles playing either more or less themselves or exactly themselves, so that's not unique. But Woody Harrelson in that film is like, oh my God, I can't believe it's Bill damn Murray, or whatever he says, Deal something Murray, because he's just so shocked that he's met Bill Murray again. Or that he's bumped into Bill Murray, not that he's met him again. Anyway, I don't tend to watch any modern films at all. When I say modern, I mean probably anything since the early 2000s. And I believe I'm happier for it. And I don't need to get disappointed about what they're doing to Star Wars franchises or any other franchises that I might have liked. And that's a subject I'll go on to maybe another day. But I want to say that you don't need to be disappointed, and you don't need to hope that they start making films in the way that you used to like, because the films aren't for your entertainment, and even if you think they are just for your entertainment because you love them, it's actually a very dangerous thing to have any sense of who you are wrapped up in any kind of Fantasyland film. Not that films are necessarily wholly and completely bad, but there's a difference. Something can be art in any medium, but generally films that are popular, even if there's an element of art to them, there's something damaging about them, because I think they either place an expectation on us that cannot be achieved in real life and makes us feel like failures always in some way, or they cause some other kind of long-term mental anguish or discordance. Maybe that's all I really need to say on that. You can discover that stuff for yourself, but that's not the point of this video. What I want to say is that Bill Murray has broken beyond the fourth wall in a way. He's not just playing cameos of himself. There's a phenomenon, and there's a film out which is the first modern film, I suppose, but it's a documentary in a way. Well, it is a documentary. It's categorized as one, let's say, anyway. And it's called The Bill Murray Stories. And the video cover or poster for it has got a picture of like a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot, a mythical creature that people talk about, say they've seen, but other people then only hear the stories related to them, and they're not sure whether to believe them or not because they sound so fantastical. And well, we, the viewers of this video, or of this movie I should say, called the Bill Murray Stories, there's a lot of video evidence of Bill basically turning up in people's lives in random places, mostly in the United States, and these are just ordinary people. And in a way, he's kind of doing like a Groundhog Day, but it's not just to that village where the groundhog was in Punxsutawney, wherever it was. What he's kind of doing is a version of that in his own real life and in real people's real lives. And then these people who sort of had this experience with him where he just would turn up for usually an evening or a day or part of a day and have a lovely, great time with them. But they would touch their lives. It wasn't just that it was a celebrity. It was much more than you might think, which I thought it was going to be at first. A celebrity surprising people by turning up in a situation where they're used to seeing him on screen, but not. It's kind of strange when you see a real person in real life. Now, of course, a real famous person in real life. Rule number one, by the way, if you do encounter a famous person, is don't go running up and screaming at them and saying, "Oh my God, it's you," or whatever, because obviously they get that all the time, and then you'll be seen as just like everybody else. And if you're hoping to make a connection with somebody that you've idolized for a long time, it's not the way to go about it, but I can't say how you can go about it, but that's just a pretty obvious thing. I think that might have played a factor in all of these people's lives, that of course they were sort of shocked, but all of these people quickly realized that this guy was just a person, right? So they were able to see beyond Bill Murray, the movie character, even though Bill Murray's movie characters contain a huge essence of him. Now, I wrote a piece on my extrapolations.blog recently enough about how Jim Morrison, was essentially given fame and riches, and with that comes, women idolizing him. But he saw that, I believe, anyway, that's the way I interpret his life, he saw that as a hell, because it guaranteed that no woman from that point on who ever proclaimed her love for him would ever mean it, or if they did, how would he possibly be able to tell the difference between just a fanatic of his, and you see this, like, of course, with Beatlemania, and with every pop band that there was, like, NSYNC or Boys in the Hood or Take That or Bros. I don't know if that was something that these two twins and another guy, but I used to think even back then that it was pathetic that all the girls were screaming after them, but obviously there was an element of jealousy as well, and saying there's nothing special about those guys, why aren't all really, a huge part of it would have been, why aren't all those girls adoring me instead? So there's that, but I'm so glad that never happened to me, because like all those TV shows where it's like, behind the music or after the show ends, it's a bit like after the fairy tale ends, where Prince Charming either rescues or marries the princess. What happens after that? Or they lived happily ever after. But they never fill in that part, and they never tell you the details, because the details are different. There's no such thing as just, and then the story ends and they live happily ever after. So I think Jim Morrison realized, or didn't, I say realized, but to him, that's what it was irrefutably recognized as, which was, it was a curse. Fame and riches were a curse, especially the fame, because he'd never, ever be able to make a real human connection with anybody else again, because all they ever saw was his persona, not whoever the person was behind the rock god image that not only was allowed to be created for him, but he himself created. So it was a bit like a Frankenstein's monster. It was something which represented him, but wasn't him. And I think that's why he turned to drink and drugs, and I think that's why he ultimately killed himself with, I believe, was a cocktail of heroin and whiskey, and essentially sedated himself to death in a bathtub, an inglorious way to go, in Paris in, I forget what year it was. Anyway, so that really depressed me, and I realized that the piece I wrote about it is not exactly uplifting, but it is a warning, at least. It's a warning to people to sort of say, set your goals and ambitions to something other than fame and riches, and also something other than, I'd like to have at least one girl or some girls adoring me, or wouldn't it be great if there was a crowd of girls chasing me, screaming, and wanting to have a lock of my hair or whatever else. That's a hell. And no wonder then people say, oh, he was very rude to his fans one day, because one day he snapped, because he gets this at every airport he flies into, and he's tired and he just wants to maybe go and sleep, or maybe have a stiff drink, or whatever it might be, and he certainly doesn't want to have to deal with a load of screaming old women or young girls or anything in between. Well, anyway, I realised after watching this documentary about Bill Murray called The Bill Murray Stories, where all these people's lives were changed and touched by Bill Murray in such a positive way. And it allowed them, just the experience that they had with Bill Murray turning up and maybe, playing the tambourine with people who are having a little sing-song in their house, helping the band along. Or people who had just been married and there was a wedding photographer taking some photographs of them on the steps of a building, and Bill Murray just is in the background, and the people who are getting their photographs taken are being distracted, and the cameraman eventually turns around and says, would you mind stop distracting my subjects here? And then he realizes Bill Murray, and he says, wow, would you like to get in a photograph with these people? And he did, and it wasn't just it was different to a celebrity pose. He was just standing there like he was a friend of theirs. And I won't ruin the film for you by telling you any other stories, but there was something different about it, and it's such a small difference, but it makes all the difference. And so just like there's a fine line between one thing and another, the line is there even if we can't draw it, but it makes the distinction between, say, something that is art and something that's just throwing paint at a canvas and then calling that modern art. So I don't know whether Bill Murray, as they say in the film, realized that he was in he could be at least, or maybe was, in a prison where everyone expected him to be, this sort of laconic character, and hey, it's Bill Murray, and hey, dance for us there, like a sort of a dancing monkey that's just for our entertainment, and I think that's another thing that famous people who get known for a certain movie or a certain character they play in a franchise of movies, that they can't go anywhere without the catchline being shouted at them, or hey, do that thing that you do in the movie, and then they feel like that they're performing puppets, which in a way they are, and they're paid a lot of money because they entertain a lot of us, and entertainment and having eyes focused on something is in and of itself one of the most, or perhaps the most valuable commodity, or something you can turn into something that's very useful. And so I think he realized at some point, yeah, this could be a prison, this could be a curse. But he figured out how to turn that on its head. And it's a bit like well, I like the movie Papillon because he kept a certain lightness in his head. He kept not only the ability to float away like a butterfly does, and I know people think that a butterfly could have negative connotations or a symbolism that's negative, and I didn't even want to mention those symbols, but I also think that there's another aspect to it, the other side of the coin, where a butterfly can float away, like Muhammad Ali said, float like a butterfly and sting like a bee. And I'd like to talk about Muhammad Ali, but in another video. But also I think it's a symbol of freedom. I think that a butterfly, even though it's a gentle creature, it can rise above the manure. And so the film Papillon, which is French for butterfly, I think that symbolizes the idea that although they could imprison this guy and put him on an island in, I think it was French Guyana, I don't think, maybe it was French Polynesia, but I think it was some French colony that was maybe, in the north of South America, I think, anyway, not that it matters. But because he'd already escaped once before, maybe they put him on an island that belongs to French Guyana, and they thought that it was like Alcatraz, he couldn't escape because how is he going to swim in the water? But even though he did escape one time, they had never broken his spirit, and that was the important thing, and the butterfly symbolized the fact that they couldn't break his spirit. So I think Bill Murray never somehow allowed his spirit to be crushed in the way that obviously it happens to so many music stars and movie stars, and I think that explains why they go crazy. Like, I mean, say for example, and I don't want to pick on anybody, but just what occurs to me is that time when Britney Spears apparently went mad and shaved all her hair off, and the tabloids reported that she was like a basket case, a mental patient escaped from a lunatic asylum, running around the streets after having shaved her head, looking like a shock or a horrific sight. And again, that's another thing, whether it's just because she had no hair, it seemed unusual, and that's why we were shocked. But she may well have had a mental breakdown, like a lot of other pop stars, popstrels, starlets, and men as well. You heard of Russell Crowe going crazy and smashing the phone, and that's nothing, and maybe having a fight with some stranger. Like, all that stuff is completely understandable if you start to think about how fame and fortune and global fame means that you can't go anywhere without being hassled. And we all like company, but we all need our space sometimes, and we all sometimes just want to be left alone, because if we're in a bad mood, the worst thing is somebody coming up to you and saying, hey, sing that song for us again, and thinking they're being original. And you get it a million times, and maybe on the millionth and one time, you just snap because you've had enough. And of course, the guy on the receiving end thinks it's personal, but it isn't. So anyway, I think Bill Murray, I don't know whether he went through a phase like this, or maybe he preempted it. But either way, he figured something out. What he figured out was he could turn what could have been a mental prison into the greatest gift in the world. So it's a way I hadn't thought about it, was that he could, even if he still hates essentially a Groundhog Day that he has built for himself, where every day if he leaves his house, he gets the same people, they're interchangeable, coming up to him and saying, oh, Bill, I loved you in Saturday Night Live, or I really liked Caddyshack, or oh, Ghostbusters is my favourite film, and he's saying, yeah, mine too, yeah, it's great, and they go, yeah, don't cross the streams, Bill, eh? And he's like, oh, yeah, God, that's a great line you pulled from the film. Just like people do in videos on YouTube, that somebody says something and there's maybe a couple of catchphrases or notable lines that people can quote, and maybe just sometimes people just verbatim write down something that was said at some point of the video, and then maybe if they're hoping everyone thumbs it up, and then everyone thumbs it up, and then some guy comes along and goes, yeah, that's what he said in the video, all right, and then somebody else goes like, yeah, but it was funny, and this sort of stuff. So that's another aspect of it. That's another way of explaining the same thing. And it's funny sometimes, but let's say if you get 1,000 people on the same video commenting saying first, or in every video, after a while you hate these guys who say first, because at some point it was maybe original and interesting. But there does come a time where you go, I've had enough of these, it's just annoying even to read first now, and so on and so on. But I think Bill figured out that even if he still hates the fact that he's trapped in some kind of a prison, he can be selfless and he can be spontaneous. And because he's Bill Murray, the famous comedian and actor, he can get away with, even if he's, drinking into the small hours with people, or having a good time, or making a lot of noise, playing in a band, or crashing a wedding, or doing whatever, that people are going to be very well disposed to him. And even if police come along and say, hey, you're making too much noise here and the neighbors are complaining, he can say, or as what did happen in this film, the guy who owned the house said, yeah, but I don't think I can cut the noise out or even turn it down, because see, Bill Murray's up here and we're all having a good time, and do you really want me to go up and tell Bill Murray that we've got to stop the band playing and he's got to stop playing the tambourine? And the police guys were saying, you've got Bill Murray up here playing the tambourine. And they said, yeah, I mean, why don't you come up? And the police were like, I don't know. And then Bill Murray comes in and goes, I am Bill Murray. And the police were kind of like, well, don't think there's much we can do about that then. So, I don't know. It was unclear to me, and I'll let you decide. I'd be very interested to hear your thoughts on whether you think that Bill Murray is genuinely enjoying himself and having a whale of a time, as if he's been given a wonderful chance to just inhabit somebody's body who not only can live his life in whatever way he wants to, but something that a lot of these people picked up from was that he was teaching them that they needn't be so concerned with whatever worries they have in their lives, and they can do the same as he has done, and they don't need to be a famous person, because a huge amount of our lives, and maybe I hope some of you will identify with this, or will have realized this, that we worry about things because we think there's a certain context that we must live in. There are certain roles we must fulfill, we have certain responsibilities, and we spend so much of our lives worrying about these things that even when the environment changes or the situation changes, we continue to worry about those things, even though not only is it unnecessary because those things don't matter anymore, but it's entirely counterproductive because we're wasting time that we could devote to something else. We're wasting our energy. We're wasting the precious time that we have having negative emotions when we could be having positive emotions. We could be enjoying things. We could be living in the moment. And of course, I think they mentioned this Taoist concept about not only living in the moment, but also taking everything in your stride. So if something negative happens, learn to recognize that maybe it's only negative because you're perceiving it as such, because you're expecting it to be negative, because maybe you assume other people would consider it to be negative. And so it's also a bit like, so they mentioned this Taoist story, which I don't know where I heard first as well, but it's about a guy who had a horse, and then the horse went lame, and so he couldn't ride it anymore, or maybe he did ride the horse, and maybe the horse bucked him, and he injured his leg, and that was a terrible misfortune. But then it was great, actually. It turned out to be a good thing, because the army came along and tried to conscript him, but because he had a broken leg and was in a wheelchair, they said, okay, well, you're not fit to be fighting, so I guess we can't draft you. And so that was an amazing thing, but because it turned out that other people in his area, or at least, doesn't matter, they don't have to be from his area, other people who were drafted then never came home. So it actually saved his life that the horse bucked him, and so on and so on and so on. Right? There's a lot of additional things. It's a bit like the old woman who swallowed a fly and then swallowed a spider, but in a different way. It's that one thing leads to another. But the moral of this sort of parable is that you, in a way, for Christians, you might say, you can't understand God's plan. Why does he allow bad things to happen in the world? Well, we perceive them as bad, but there may be a reason that we can't understand at the time, or we think it's suffering, but we don't understand that there's some sacrifice to be made now for something later. So we may not be able to zoom out and see the full picture. And a lot of Christians will take it that, okay, God works in mysterious ways, we'll leave it at that. We can't possibly think to understand his plan or tell him that he knows how to chart the course of human history or whatnot. So all of this is very similar to the poem If by Rudyard Kipling, where he says, if you can treat success and misfortune, or something along those lines, as the two imposters that they are, if you can take the sort of the good with the bad and try and smooth out the peaks and the troughs. So not that I am trying to advocate that what you should do is take any drugs to sort of smooth you out. Certainly no Xanax. Everything has to be natural. It has to be, let's say, if we're talking in kind of a medical terms, it has to be a cognitive behavioral therapy, but one which you perform on yourself, maybe in the form of a sort of looking in the mirror every day and doing some kind of positive reassurance or reinforcement, or just say, today I'm going to try and not have highs that are too high or lows that are too low, and whatever happens, I'm going to try and not get too emotionally invested in anything, but for my own good. So it's hard to say whether Bill Murray is ever really genuinely enjoying himself or not, but no matter whether he is or whether he's not, he's doing something that's almost like Jesus in a way. He's showing them an example of how they can live better lives through learning to, I suppose, have a good time, but not just have a good time. It's more than that. It's not just entertain yourselves. It's to make connections between each other. It's like he comes along and says, all of you who are living your lives and maybe being a little bit nasty to each other and entering into transactions, or where somebody needs to go to the liquor store and buy some alcohol because they're going to a party. In this case, the guy says, oh, I need to rush out to a liquor store, and he bought some beer and whatnot. And then it occurred to him, he said, well, I've kept you a little bit late here and you had to close up late, but he said, why don't you come along with me to my party, because Bill Murray's going to be there. And then he made a new friend and stuff like that. But he wouldn't have thought about making a new friend if it wasn't for Bill Murray's influence. And so Bill Murray was leaving each community that he would pop up into almost like some kind of, like a ghost of, I don't know if it's Christmas future, where he suddenly filled them with a spirit of kindness to each other and a love for each other, and reawakened something, almost like reawakened the spirit of Christmas. So again, in this movie, they likened his role to a bit like the passage of the story arc of the character, where he goes from being a nasty guy to somebody who, despite everything, helps everyone, and starts to take whatever pain he has and turn it outwards, and when he's forging it into something good, and then he turns it outwards, and he turns whatever negative thing into a positive force for the world. So that's the inspiring thing about that movie. So I encourage you to watch it. It's called The Bill Murray Stories. And the reason I'm encouraging you to watch it is because we all need some positivity in our lives, to act as a natural counterbalance to all the doom and gloom and the shock and the awe and the horror and the frightening feeling that every new revelation is always a bad revelation. Even if we uncover genuine conspiracies where, yes, it has turned out that pretty much everything in history is false, but worse than that, it's been designed to deliberately trick us into acting against our better nature, or finding some kind of fulfillment, or finding some kind of, as some people put it, journey towards sanctification or purification of the soul, or transcendence into something better. So it's not just that so much of history is a lie, but so much of our reality and history, part of the reality we have now, has been a trick in order to subjugate us mentally. And while all of that is fascinating and important to discover, because you need to figure out what the problem is before you can fix it. But so many people, myself included, get fixated with uncovering more evidence of what the problem is. And after a while, you sort of need to say, well, at some point, we need to make a plan for when we figure out pretty much what the entire problem is, and what next? What then? And it seems like the solution might be, we have to be kinder to each other. And I think in this movie as well, they also might make the point that you have to be kind. It's probably more important to be kind to the people who are the most, on the surface at least, reprehensible type of people. No, actually, that's in another movie. I'll say it for now. It's called It's a Wonderful Life. So the people who are the most vindictive and cruel to other people, look, they may just be being that way because they were broken themselves. They were they had an unhappy childhood, in one form or another. People don't have to turn out bad, but a lot of people do because of that. I still hold people personally responsible for their actions and what they do to other people. But those people, perhaps more than other people who are nice to us, in fact, unfortunately, probably, not just probably, but they do need more kindness being shown to them. And maybe you're never going to see any results or reciprocation from them. But I think we need to try, and if we're all kinder to each other, no matter who the people standing opposite us are, only all of us together might be able to make a difference. So it's a bit like that phrase, I know it sounds a bit trite, but one person can't necessarily make a difference, but all of us together can make a difference. One person can't push the boulder up the hill, but a few of us can do that, and when it gets to the top of the hill, then it can roll down of its own accord, and we create a momentum that starts rolling of its own accord. Well, this is another quite long video, and I think I'm going to end there because I don't want to labour the point too much, but I have brought up some other things that I'm going to do further videos on. So one I mentioned was Muhammad Ali, and I want to talk about him because I think there's a lot of positivity to come out of just looking at his attitude to life. And also, It's a Wonderful Life, and there's a lot of positivity in that too. And I'll just sum up by saying this. So good things and bad things happen to everyone in life, and a lot of people think that everything is only negative in their lives because only negative things happen to their lives, in their lives, because somehow something, the cosmos, God, fate, it's their destiny, or it's just who they are, they're not lucky like other people, they've had bad luck, and everything that happens to them is by its own very nature bad. And of course we're familiar with the concept of a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you expect everything that's going to happen to you to be bad, then it will be. So no matter what does happen, even if there was such a thing as a predetermined outcome for everything, which I don't think there is, it kind of doesn't matter, because we still have free will as to how we choose to react to everything. And so I think a fundamental principle is that we must take very great care to understand, realize, and then take responsibility for our attitude to whatever situation we may find ourselves in.